Thank you for choosing to hear about Emerge. I don't know what you all know already about our program. You got a little bit of an overview just now. I can give you a lot more detail now. And so I'm going to put up my PowerPoints. And does anybody have any questions while I'm doing that, or any particular things you'd like to see me address besides just explaining what our model is? Okay. All right, from the beginning. Okay, can you all see the PowerPoints? Great, okay. All right, so this is the Emerge model. I think I already mentioned this, so I'm not going to dwell on this, the fact that we have a very high percentage of voluntary clients, so they're self-referred, they're partner referred, basically. We're getting pretty close to them overcoming the number of court-referred clients. And so we're really trying to, I think it really has pushed us to really think about ways of motivating people other than externally, other than by the court. And so I think having a high number of voluntary clients has actually been very useful in our groups because they have a good influence, I think, on the people that are referred by the courts and by the child welfare system. And so this is basically our program. It's 40 weeks long. It's 2 stages. There's an 8-week first stage. That's the educational part of the program, 8 lessons. I'll go over some of those with you. And then we move on to what we call a second stage, which is much more of a problem solving. And so all of our groups at Emerge and also in Massachusetts are for heterosexual men or male, female, co-led. For the gay men's group that we have, those are 2 men. And for the lesbian, bisexual groups, those are 2 women. And so the group leaders are kind of matching the population that we're working with. This is kind of like a flow chart, which just shows the middle column is really what happens to the client as they go through our program, the group member, that is. The right-hand column is what happens in terms of our contact with the partner or the victim. And the left-hand column is what we basically, how we interact with the referral source, which is the courts or child welfare. And so we always write a monthly report. Even if it's a voluntary client, we still write a monthly report. And as I said, partners are welcome to have copies of those reports. And many of them do decide that they really want those reports. Even if they're no longer with their partner, they feel like they have a stake in what happens in terms of sharing children with them and so forth. And so, I mean, they're trying to make decisions about whether to expand his access to the children and so forth. And so it's very useful for them to hear from us. Not only is he attending, but what are our concerns? Do we have any concerns about him in terms of how he may be like minimizing or blaming and so forth, okay? So it's rotating admissions. They rotate in and out of the first stage, the first 8 weeks, and then they rotate into what we call the second stage group. And so I'm going to jump right in and give just a quick kind of a description of some of those lessons, because each of these lessons sort of matches a learning objective. And so one of our learning objectives, and I think this is similar for a lot of programs, is broadening their understanding about what abuse is, because many of them, as you know, that you're already working with abusers, they have a very narrow conception of what abuse is. They think it's only if you beat somebody up or, put your hands on someone, and so we have a very useful lesson. It's called What Counts as Violence, right? And so that's really that one is just about physical violence and really broadening even their understanding about physical violence. And then the second lesson is about other types of abuse, psychological, emotional, economic, and sexual violence. Let's see if I can move my PowerPoint here. All right. So this for this first lesson, I think the thing that I want to most emphasize is the definition that we provide for violence. And so you can sort of see it's not the standard legal definition for violence, okay? So anything that creates fear, okay, anything that forces someone to do something that they don't want to do, anything that prevents someone from doing something that they do want to do. Okay, so all of that counts as violence. And so when we're brainstorming, this starts out as a brainstorm, there's a lot of prompting, like, okay, so what are ways that you can scare someone without putting your hands on them? Okay. And so then they come up with, threats, they come up with using their size to intimidate, they come up with banging the table, punching holes in walls. And they even come up and we'll prompt them even further. What are ways you can sort of remind a person of your past violence, such as by pacing or just standing between them and the doorway, and so forth. Okay, because most victims have what you'd call hypervigilance, right? They're kind of looking for the early warning signs of abuse, and so their radar goes out every time they see him pacing, every time they see him giving the silent treatment. What's coming next, basically, and then children become hypervigilant as well. And so it's kind of a nice exercise because it starts with them brainstorming. We are definitely prompting them to expand their definition, to think what are ways of restraining someone without putting your hands on them, and so forth. Okay. And so that's kind of like just for starters. That's okay. We want to get everybody on the same page in terms of understanding, okay, when we ask about violence, this is what we're asking about. Okay. So then we move on to the second lesson, which is the other forms of abuse: psychological, sexual, and economic abuse. A lot of group leaders like to break them into 3 small groups, and each group is assigned to brainstorm one of those categories of abusive behavior. Some group leaders like to keep everybody in the same group and they go through each of these categories sequentially. But definitely it's a brainstorm, definitely it's prompting, and probably it is, I would say, one of the lessons that people most consistently refer back to when they're finishing the program, when we ask them, okay, how were you influenced by the program? They basically saying, I never thought of all the different ways you can abuse someone. I just thought, I looked at that list and I thought, oh my God, I'm doing everything on that list, and that really kind of opened my eyes, basically. So that is very, and I think most programs do some version of this, but I like the idea of starting these things as brainstorms, seeing if you can get it coming from them as much as possible. Okay, so then we're monitoring, we're writing down. Now with Zoom, of course, so all of our classes are still Zoom, so we have templates for each of these lessons. And so we're just sort of writing down their answers, the brainstorm, right in front of everybody. And so it's actually works very well, to do this via Zoom, all of these lessons. So then the next learning objective is understanding the impact of abusive behavior on your partner and your children. And you can see we have 2 lessons that relate to that one. So we have one lesson of the effects of abuse on partners, and then we have another lesson, which is actually very similar to what you just saw with Lisa Nitsch, of the effects of abuse on children. Okay, because they were doing it as a kind of a brainstorm as well. And so we're just asking them, okay, for starters, what do you think are ways that our partners are affected by being abused? We're doing a lot of prompting. We're listing physical effects. We're listing feelings like fear, distrust, mixed feelings about the relationship, avoidance, anger, all of those things. Shame. I think a lot of victims feel shame. They feel isolated over time. They may blame themselves as well. They may come to feel responsible for you too. So most victims, I think, at some point, just as a kind of a sheer survival mechanism, begin to take on the task of feeling like it's their job to emotionally manage their abusive partner. So then, and the interesting thing about that lesson is that a lot of the group members have observed their partners doing and feeling all of those things. It's just that they don't connect it to their abusive behavior. And they'll even say things like, she's always unhappy, for Christ's sakes. See what I'm dealing with? Like, they don't even connect her unhappiness with their abusive behavior. They think, well, gee, I'm just with somebody who's impossible to please, right? And so even that, is something that they don't, they don't see necessarily as being a reflection or as something that's caused by their abusive behavior. And really what we're trying to do is to normalize. We're saying the very things you complain about are actually the direct result. And there's kind of like some enlightened self-interest in that. So because basically they're saying, I want my partner to stay with me. I want my partner to trust me. I want my partner to appreciate me. And yet you're doing things that actually make those things impossible. Okay. So I think as a motivator, I think enlightened self-interest, comes before real empathy, right? I think first you get people to see more clearly how is their behavior preventing them from having what they really want and what they need in a relationship. And so then, again, very similar to the lesson that you just saw with Lisa and Nitch, we're breaking it into four groups of children in terms of their ages. We're asking them, how do you think, there's two questions actually. One is, how are children of that age exposed? How are they exposed to domestic violence? And then what are ways that they're impacted? Okay. And so that's a lesson where you get a lot of people thinking about themselves as children and their own upbringing, in terms of having been exposed. I think it's a great lesson because I think you see more empathy, I think, when you get them to think about their children than when you're trying to get them to think about their partners. Okay, those are the questions. All right. So then another learning objective is to teach skills. And you can see that we have 3 lessons that relate to that. Negative self-talk is a tool. It's a real tool that we give them. And so we generally, the way that we do that is we start with a non-domestic violence scenario. You're driving in your car. Some other driver cuts you off, you spill your coffee all over your lap, and it's just a mess. What are your negative thoughts about the other driver? Okay, then the next question is, what behavior would follow from that? So then they're brainstorming things like, following the other driver, cutting them off, giving them the finger, swearing at them, high beaming them. Then the next question is, what's the impact of that? What are the possible consequences? Getting arrested, ruining your day, being fined, getting hurt, and so forth. So then the next question is, what's a more constructive, we call that positive self-talk, of thinking about that. And so when we say positive, we don't necessarily mean like Pollyannish, like I'm glad the other driver is getting ahead of me, right? It's more like, forget about it. It's not worth it, right? I mean, don't do anything stupid to get myself in trouble, right? So for a lot of our group members, that's really the best they can come up with. And yet that's very useful, right? A deeper level, I think, of thoughts would be, well, I've done that myself. I've cut drivers off without knowing that that's what I was doing. So there's a really kind of a good variety, I think, of answers there. Some people are already good at that, by the way, but they're not good at redirecting their thoughts with their partners, right? So there you have the skills, is what I'm saying, okay? So then the consequences that follow from that, you've avoided being arrested, you've avoided getting arrested, you're able to move on with your day and your life much sooner. So then we give them a domestic violence scenario. The one I like to give is you're attending a program, an abusive program. you've been on your best behavior for a month, and then you have an argument and you raise your voice and your partner says to you, you're never going to change. I knew it. You're never going to change. So we go through the same 6 questions. Okay. So what's your negative self-talk about that? She's a bitch. She never gives me credit. Always assumes the worst. What follows from that in terms of your behavior? Dropping out of the program, leaving the house, getting drunk, becoming physically violent. What's the consequences of that? You've just proven her right, basically. Right? You've just resorted to violence again or abuse. And so basically you've proven that she's right not to trust you. Okay. So then the positive self-talk, that's where it gets really interesting, to get them to think, okay, what would possibly could be constructive about that? What are constructive thoughts you could actually think? What is she feeling? Okay. So I find that in working with men, that a common problem for men in general is to sort of focus on the words that are being used rather than the feelings that are being expressed. And so when they're focusing on the words, they're focusing on the fact that she just said, you're never going to change, right? And they want to argue about whether that's right or wrong. But if they're focusing on the feelings, then they're basically saying what she's feeling is she's feeling doubt. She's feeling distrust. She's feeling hopeless. I find that to be extremely useful. I mean, so many men over the years have said, wow, that really was something that I never thought about, right? The importance of focusing on the feelings, right? And to respond at that level. So, okay, so then that leads to behavior, such as saying things like, well, I know it's going to take a long time. I know you're not there yet. I want you to know that I'm going to keep working on this, right? And then the behavior is that you do keep working on it, right? But you're not expecting your partner to reward you every step of the way. So that is their standing assignment. That is what we want them to be doing between sessions. We only see them 2 hours a week. So every single day, they're going to be having negative self-talk, and they are the only people that can redirect those thoughts. And so the standing assignment, every week we give them, they check in and they tell us, okay, what were your negative self-talk in the past week? And how did you redirect yourself? Did you redirect yourself? Okay. So that gives you kind of a real-time understanding of where they're at. Okay. So let's talk about, I was ahead of my PowerPoints. I'm sorry. So now you can see what I was just talking about. Okay. All right. So moving on to abusive versus respectful communication. I think it really is important to give them tools. And I think that these are things that I think a lot of men don't necessarily kind of recognize, much less abusive men. So respectful communication, the whole value of listening, for instance. So listening is kind of like a thing, right? That a lot of men haven't got the memo about, right? And so, the whole idea that sometimes when a person's upset, you don't have to solve their problem, right? I mean, so, I think men are socialized to solve problems, and it doesn't occur to us that all we have to do is listen, right? And that is, for children, it's soothing to listen to them when they have their little gripes, right? And it is healing. I think it's much more healing when somebody's upset at you for them to feel like you're listening, you're taking it in. You're not trying to solve their problem. You're not trying to contradict them. You're not trying to argue with them. You're not trying to point out what their problems are. All right. And so this is the whole, it's nonverbal communication as well as, so we're looking at respectful and disrespectful nonverbal. So classic example of disrespectful nonverbal communication is eye rolling, sucking your teeth, looking away, and so forth. and I always like to point out, like, if you're still doing that, you might as well still be violent, right? Because you're violent, your partner's not healing. Because nonverbal communication is even more powerful than verbal communication. And so if she sees you kind of like rolling your eyes, then basically you're communicating very powerfully that you're not changing, right? That you're disgusted. You have no real interest in how that person has been affected, and so that's really useful information, I think. And I mean, I think, for women, like, you might think, oh my God, that's just so obvious, right? But kind of like men are idiots, right? But in fairness to men, I think men have been less likely to have been socialized, to have learned the value of listening and the value of really understanding feelings. So I'm going to move on to the next activity, which is called quick fixes versus long-term solutions. We brainstorm what are quick fixes, and but obvious things, right? Apologies, promises, giving gifts, making dramatic confessions. But then also what we list here is not just good behaviors, but what follows the good behaviors for them. So like, let's say that they're out of the house, they're separated. So if they're not getting the desired result by their apologies, then what they resort to is pressure tactics, guilt tripping, right? Using the children. And so when we're listing quick fixes, we're listing both those positive, so-called positive things, but we're also listing the negative things as well, because it's just a reflection that most abusers are constantly alternating between these sort of like tearful confessions, and then just becoming abusive because it's not giving them their desired result. Most abusers are willing to apologize 2 or 3 times, but then if she's not accepting the apology, then they resort to, do you ever think about why I get angry? Right? Do you ever think about what you're doing that makes me angry? Okay. So they take it all back, in other words. And this is where we kind of talk about space and time. So the concept of space and time. So giving your partner space, giving your partner time. Giving her space is like not hovering over her, not respecting whatever the limits are about how much contact she wants to have with you, how much she wants to talk about the situation, how much she wants to share her feelings. And time means the amount of time that it takes for that person to heal. And that's not convenient for a lot of abusers because it means it can be really prolonged, right? They kind of look at it as, they tend to look at it as she's still punishing me, right? Whereas we help to reframe that as it takes a long time to heal. And so there are things you can do or not do that can really help with the healing, okay? And there's no guarantee. This is kind of a roadmap of accountability, the different stages of accountability, which we also talk about when we talk about long-term solutions, okay? So I'm going to move on to, so the other thing, so you just saw the 7 lessons. There's actually, one of them takes two sessions that are done in the first stage. But then the other activity is that we give everybody 2 opportunities to describe what their abusive behavior has been. And so we call it a long check-in at Emerge, but and basically the group leaders are writing down what they're saying. And we summarize that in our reports to the partners and the courts. This is how he describes his abusive behavior. Okay, that is accountability, right? It is difficult for them to do this. It's probably when they're at their most defensive. And for that reason, we don't do it at the beginning of the session. We do the lesson first, because I think once you give them the lesson, they're a lot more receptive. And actually, they incorporate what they've learned in the lesson in how they describe their abusive behavior. They're able to kind of like really use words now that they previously would not have used, right? Words like gaslighting, social isolation, jealous accusations, and so forth, right? So it kind of opens up the door, is what I'm saying. Any questions so far? Okay. One thing I'd like to say, oh, you have a question, Lester? Okay, go ahead. Unmute yourself, though.
Yes, are these closed groups or are they open?
No, it's open. So in the second phase, there's far fewer arrivals and departures. So in the first 8 weeks, there's 2 or 3 people cycling in and 2 or 3 people cycling out every single session. But in the second stage, it's once a month we're replacing somebody who's already completed the program. And so they get to know each other for much longer periods of time, which is a real advantage because they become invested in each other, right? They know each other, which gives them the ability to give much more meaningful feedback. We don't have them give feedback in the first 8 weeks because it would be lousy feedback, right? It'd be commiserating with each other's grievances, right? But in the second phase, we definitely, and part of our model is actually teaching them how to give constructive feedback to each other, because we want it to come from them as much as we can, okay? And so there are individual assignments, so that we don't have lessons anymore in the second phase. We have assignments that everybody's required to do. And one of those assignments, I'm going to show you a little bit about it. It's called a relationship history. I'll explain that in a bit. We give what we call individual turns to people, where everybody focuses on what they're reporting from week to week and does problem solving with them. We do goal setting. That's another assignment. So everybody is assigned these tasks in the group, and we do it right in front of the group, and everybody is involved in when one person's doing their assigned task. Okay. And so I want to show, these are the assigned tasks. So everybody in the second phase has to do all of these things. Okay. And they come at different intervals. So between weeks 15 and 25 is when we want a person to do their relationship history. Now I'm going to show you an example of a relationship history, just because I think it's the best way to explain it, really. I'm not going to go through the entire relationship history, but because it would take too long. We first find out how many relationships have we had, and we pick the 2 or 3 longest. We always want to count the victim, the known victim, right? So then beyond that, like the 2 longest, if they've had children with someone, we want to count them. And so the first thing we do, okay, let's tell us how many relationships you've had, and then we decide, the group leaders, how many of those we're going to do in the relationship history. This is what it looks like in a live group. There's a wall chart that has all the headers across it's newsprint. But in Zoom sessions, we actually have a template. And so it's actually a lot easier. So we have the template, and the men are taking turns asking the 14 questions. So there's 14 questions about each relationship you've had. And the men are taking turns asking those questions. So everybody's very involved. Now, normally what you do is you start with this first relationship with Virginia, and then you ask those 14 questions, and then you go to his next relationship with Alice. Because I want to show you the patterns here, I'm showing you the answers to all 3 relationships at the same time. So here you see that Robert is pretty age appropriate. Sometimes you see that there's a lot of age difference in their partners, but in Robert's case, he's pretty age appropriate in the partners he's with. Here we see our first pattern. Robert has children with women. He doesn't stay with them, but he has children with women that he gets involved with. The victim in here is Jenny, by the way. So the current relationship is Jenny, and she has a stepson. I mean, and she has a son he's beginning to assume a parental role with. This is a really interesting question. If you start asking this question, you'll be surprised at how useful it is. Any kind of, what do you see in terms of patterns here, in terms of Robert, in terms of how he meets women? Anybody have any thoughts about this?
I would say he waits to a point when they are vulnerable or where they need his assistance.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we actually have a name for this, David. It's called rescuing a woman in distress, right? So he's like, comes along like Johnny on the spot to help fix a woman's car, right? And with Jenny, the last relationship, there's two different types of rescue going on. He's helping to start her car, but he's also, she's still on the rebound from a bad relationship with a partner who's still abusing drugs. And he's like Johnny on the spot with a sensitive ear, because he's in recovery. And so he looks so good by comparison to her ex, right? And so that is, the men look for it, by the way. It's so common that the men look for it. Oh, so you are rescuing her. And by the way, it's largely a figment of their imagination that they're rescuing, right? A lot of times the victim feels like she's rescuing them, right? So you got two people who both feel like they're rescuing the other person, but it's a bad way to start a relationship. And why is that? Well, because it makes them feel like they really, the partner is beholden to them, right? They're already sort of, right, first date, they're finding out about each other's life story, basically, which also, I think, represents bad boundaries. Here is the next question. How long did this relationship last? We can see that Robert kind of times out after about two to 4 years. So he's good to 2 to 4 years. He has a child, and then he's ready to move on. Okay. Usually he's started an affair with somebody else before he ends it, by the way. This is a really interesting, useful question. It really gives you a sense of what their values are, right? Any thoughts about Robert in terms of what he's attracted to?
He likes long hair.
He likes long hair, yeah. What else does he like? He likes his women friendly, right? He likes them sort of like polite. But then that, by the way, that begins to seriously bother him over time. She's too friendly. Even being pretty, it can become a later complaint. She's too pretty. She attracts too much attention, right? Independent sometimes is one of the words you see, but then he's seriously annoyed by how independent she is, right? And so it's really interesting to sort of track these attractions and to see how does that change over time, basically. The very things you're attracted to are become the very biggest complaints over time, okay? And the men are very good at prompting each other, by the way. So they'll say, well, okay, so she's short, she's pretty, she's got long hair. Was there anything about her personality that you were attracted to? Well, yeah, she was friendly, she's smart. Okay, so there's a really good engagement on this exercise. Everybody's very involved and they're like private investigators with each other, where they're kind of like, because we're doing the new guy, right, in the group. And so they're all like really invested because they've done their relationship history, right? And so they're actually very good at asking those questions. What was her attraction to you? See, he likes his women short because he's tall, right? And he's kind of a rebel. He's kind of a bad boy. He likes his women sweet and innocent because he's like a bad boy, right? And his recovery. Okay, so how long before you had sex? This is really interesting. I just did a presentation at a conference at the BISME conference in Michigan about this because I was curious about, do abusers have first date sex and second date sex more than non-abusers. What do you think? Do you think abusive men are more likely to have first date sex?
No, I think abusers probably put it off for a long time and use it as a tool.
Oh, well, you might think that, David, but actually our experience is that they're much more likely to have first or second date sex
Yeah.
than the general public. I looked at a research study that looked at, it was a large population study, and it was 31%, I think, of people in long-term relationships started with first date or second. Some clients, it was 41% had first or second. And the significance of it is lack of boundaries. There's kind of like the presumption of closeness because you've had sex, right? You think you know the person a lot more than you do. Also, for victims, the first sex generally signifies ownership. He was so sweet and understanding before we had sex when he was courting me. Then as soon as we have sex, it's like he owns me. All of this jealousy started coming out of him. You see what I'm saying? No. And so it becomes a real turning point in abusive relationships. Did you have affairs? Yes. Notice the names. We're asking the names of the women they had affairs with, and notice how some of the names keep showing up. So with Virginia, he has a one-night stand with Mary Ann, and then when he's with then he has this longer involvement with a woman named Danielle. Then when he's with Alice, there's Danielle again. So Danielle keeps showing up, right? As kind of like the safety net or the booty call, or the person he can keep going back to if he's not getting what he wants from his primary partner. Okay. Okay. So what did you argue about? I'm going to skip past this one in the interest of time. Because this is my favorite question. What were her biggest complaints about you? So we're really broadening the discussion here away from just abusive behavior. What are the things that really kill your relationships for you? What are the ways that you're not doing right by your partner? What are her biggest complaints about you? And so there's a lot of prompting here by the other men in the group. Okay. So you can sort of see that there's kind of a real pattern of selfishness by Robert. Like he comes and goes as he pleases. He stays out for 2 or 3 nights at a time. But when he's home, he gets upset when she's on the phone with her friends. Right? One of the other men said, "Wow, that's so selfish." Okay. And so they're very good at identifying these patterns, right? Also, another pattern here is he's on the fence. He's not really fully committed, even though he has children with women. And also even when he's sobered up, alcohol is still a problem, even his recovery. Because what's happening with Jenny is that he will move in with her, and then she'll start having demands on him. And then he'll accuse her of jeopardizing his sobriety. And then he'll disappear for a meeting. And then he'll stay out for like 2 or 3 weeks, right? And then repeat the pattern. Obviously in violation, you're not even supposed to be in a relationship the first year of your sobriety, right? And so which other men really kind of called out, right? But he's trying to have it both ways. He wants to have the benefits of a relationship, a sexual relationship, but then he also wants to sort of use his sobriety as a weapon against her when she becomes too needy. What was your abusive behavior? We only knew about his violence towards Jenny before we did his relationship history. And so all of a sudden we're seeing it's not just Jenny, right? It's every partner. This is not unusual. This is typical. Usually when you do relationship histories, you find that there's been abusive behavior in all of their longer term relationships. What's the effects? How did you respond? He basically doubled down. Like when she'd get upset, he'd go out drinking. One of the men said, "Do you ever like just come home and start an argument, just had an excuse to go out drinking?" He said, "Oh yeah, absolutely." How did the relationship end? She did. She moved out of state. Alice, she did. She moved out of state. And so the next two questions, I don't have them listed here, but the next two questions is, what's your biggest regret? And also, how could you have achieved a different outcome in this relationship? And so the biggest regret, there are two common answers here. One is that I had no business being in this relationship. I was not ready to be responsible, right? I was not ready to have a child with somebody. In retrospect, I should not have gotten involved. I shouldn't have had sex right away with someone, right? Because I didn't even know what I was getting into. They feel like they can control the outcome. You can just have sex with a woman and totally control the outcome, okay? Another answer is I really mistreated her. She was a really good person, and I really did not realize what I had when I had it. I really feel bad about how I affected her. That's another common answer. And then how could you have achieved a different outcome? The two typical answers are ended the relationship sooner, not have gotten involved to begin with, or have gotten help sooner to recognize and to redirect myself so I'm not being abusive. And so I want to show you one thing. The other exercise that follows from this is creating goals. And so the way that we do goals is we'll have the other group members recommend goals to Robert. And Robert comes up with his own goals. When we're having live groups, we actually send Robert out of the room to come up with his goals. And then the other men are talking about what they want to recommend to him. We don't do that in Zoom, obviously, because we don't send them out of the room, but we enlist everybody in the group. So the whole group is involved. So these are Robert's goals on the left here. And then on the right is what the group members are recommending to him. Do you see any difference there between what Robert is coming up with as his goals and what the group is recommending to him? Anybody want to say what you're noticing? Well, what some people say is that the group's goals are much more specific, right? Robert's goals are very general. They're not even achievable because they're so general, right? There's no action steps there, okay? And so that's why I think we enlist the help of other people, because a lot of our clients, they don't lead goal-directed lives, right? I didn't. I grew up in a family where there weren't any goals. We didn't like have any plans. There was no plan to go to college, right? There was no saving for the future. You know, it's day-to-day survival. And so that's what a lot of our group members are like. They have never literally had to think about what their goals are in life, right? And so this is very useful to give them help, because some people have done that and are very good at that. And so, but it's also a type of accountability, because then then Robert's asked, all right, do you want to adopt the group's goals, what the group is recommending? Robert says yes. We ask him to report in from week to week about his goals, right? Notice that one of the goals is, because he hadn't had any contact with his two children by the two prior mothers for 5 years. And so the goal was, okay, well, why don't you see if you can call them at least once a month? They were living out of state, but his mother actually had retained a relationship. Robert's mother often had the two girls at her house, and she'd encourage Robert to come over to see his two daughters. But for 5 years, he'd refused to do that, saying, it's just going to stir up too much trouble. They probably hate me because of what the mothers have said about me. So his new partner, Jenny, had encouraged him to go see his two daughters at his mother's house. And that was the day that he became violent towards Jenny. That was the day he got arrested. He actually stabbed her. She was lending her car keys to him. He like pushed her against the refrigerator, and then she tried to get her car keys away from him. And he ended up stabbing her in the chest with her own car keys. So that's how he came to our program. So giving a turn is when you're focusing, and generally it's every week we do this, every session. We'll do relationship history for the first hour of the class. And then the remaining hour, we're giving turns to everybody. So everybody gives it, like we call it check-in. And then we're giving feedback, and we're enlisting the whole group in doing this and giving feedback. And over time, the feedback becomes really good. It's interesting to see the longer the person is attending the second phase, they're observing each other's feedback. And we're also giving them feedback about the quality of their feedback. And we're actually saying there are two ways we're evaluating your participation in the program. One is, are you willing to talk about yourself and to offer up information so we can help you? Two, are you able to give constructive feedback to other people in the group? So we are being transparent in saying, this is how we're evaluating we are going to put this in all of your progress reports. So if you are transparent like that, you will find that they will begin to respond to that. Otherwise, they wouldn't think it's relevant. I'm not here to solve other people's problems. That's not my business. And we're saying, actually, it is, because it's easier to see somebody else's problem than your own problem. And by offering constructive feedback, that's a way of sort of seeing those same things in yourself, right? And also practicing to receive feedback from other people. And so that's why it's important. And that's why it's important for us to be transparent with them about that is our expectation. And so generally every session, we'll do a relationship for the first hour. And let's say there's 8 people in the group, and we'll say, okay, we'll divide up the time, and everybody's going to get like 5 minutes, or everybody's going to get 6 minutes. That's how the groups operate and emerge. Or we do somebody's goal setting, and then the remaining hour, we're going to do the individual turns. Here's the skill. I mentioned this in the panel previously. This is just a more detailed version of the survival skills exercise, where we asked them to talk about what are different survival skills that they developed. And these are some of the typical things that they list. Being arrogant is really interesting, because if you grow up in an abusive home, you don't necessarily believe that other people are going to notice your good points. And so it's better just to point them out to other people, right? So that's an interesting way, that I think some kids are affected by living in a violent home, is they become arrogant, actually. They also become defensive. They become really distrusting, cynical, because if you care about things, you could be disappointed, right? Distrusting, because if you trust people, they could hurt you. So it's better just not to trust people. So as I said previously, all of those things are toxic to a relationship, right? And so basically, by doing this exercise, we're helping them to see, okay, these are the skills I developed. These are the skills that are now getting in the way. These are my worst enemies now. Okay, the ways that I've learned to be distrusting, defensive, right? Not letting in any feedback, not trusting other people. These are the ways that I make it impossible to have good relationships. Role playing is kind of an optional exercise, but it's basically role playing. Somebody talks about an argument they have with their partner. One of the recent role plays was one of the men was saying that his parents are blaming his fiance because she got a restraining order. And so, and then even when the restraining order ended, she's now no longer welcome at their house. So they're still blaming, his parents are still blaming her for the fact that she took out a restraining order. And he's basically saying, I can't control my parents. And we're saying, and the other men were saying, yes, you can. And so we actually did a role play with him where he could have a conversation with his parents and explain to them, if she's not welcome at our house, then I'm not welcome either. She is the most important relationship in my life. It really is important for you to respect her. So that's what came out of the role play. Okay. Self-evaluation, that's another required activity. Let me just see how I'm doing the time here. I got 7 minutes left. I was going to show you some of the parent, we have a standalone parenting group. It's 12 weeks. It's free of charge for anyone who's attending Emerge. It's very popular, great word of mouth advertising. And so that's something we do, but I think I'm not going to go into that because we only have 7 minutes left, I think. Any questions or comments?
There was a question earlier, David. I'm sorry, it was a little bit earlier in the presentation, but it looks like it was from Tina. How do you respond when they say what counts as a relationship, or relationships they say we were just talking, but clearly it was a relationship or sexual?
Well, I think usually a person, if a person is basically saying they haven't had any relationships, then we're going to count some things like that, right? We're going to count those because that becomes grist for the mill, right? Where we say, okay, so what is it that actually you're doing? Is it just like friends with benefits, or is it like sexual exploitation, or what? And so we want to get better information about what's actually happening in these, relationships, right? Yeah, but usually what we're going to do is we're going to definitely include the longest ones. If they've lived with somebody, we're going to count that. But if they haven't lived with anybody, if they're young, then we're going to count like maybe their longest dating relationships or their longest relationships where they have had sex with somebody. Yeah. So I'm seeing what Tina is saying that she knew up front, right? I think that sort of becomes an issue. Okay, how's that working for you? So what do you want? I find that that's not necessarily honest, that they're saying she knew what, and it may have changed. So even though the partner may have said, oh yeah, I'm fine with that, casual sex, a lot of times in our experience, that changes, right? And so we want to get better information. We don't want to just sort of take their sort of like casual word about this, right? Any other questions or comments?
You can also unmute if you want. That's also an option.
Yeah, just jump in if you just want, you don't have to chat it. You can just say, shout out your question.
Well, thank you, David. That was really informative. It was really interesting learning about that model. I haven't been.
Yeah, let me just say this, Shauna, just because I've got a few minutes left here, is that
Sure.
I really believe in letting there be silence in a group. I think that what happens in a group is that when you ask group members for their feedback, a lot of times they can't think of what they want to say, basically, right? And so I think that a lot of times what I've noticed with group leaders is that they'll jump right in then and give the answer. It's like that famous scene from what's that movie about Ferris Bueller, anybody, right? And so I find that if you give it enough time, if you just really give people enough time to compose their thoughts, they really will. And they'll, because otherwise they're going to try to outweight you, right? Because they know that if you open it up and nobody says anything, then you're just going to fill in the blanks for them, right? And so I feel that that's really important to honor the silence, to let there be a space for people to think about what they want to say, right? And over time, when you do that, they become much better participators, right? Because otherwise they're just being very passive. They're not really participating in their own change process. They're kind of waiting for you to fix them. And so only by sort of like demonstrating that that is essential for them to talk, to communicate. And we're going to wait for you to do that, right? And we're going to actually evaluate you based on that. Okay. Then I think that that begins to create a much different outcome, basically. Any other thoughts or reflections about this?
There was just another question. Do you have a manual for your program?
We absolutely do. So you can go on our website, and I think the manual costs $50. It's you get it free if you take our training. So we have a 2-day training when it's in other states, and if you take the training, you get that for free. But it's yeah, it's very well laid out. It's very specific. It's very detailed, much more detailed than what I showed you in terms of how to do those lessons and how to do those exercises. Yeah. We have it in Boston. We have it 3 times a year, by the way. In Boston, it's 3 days because we have people in our group that come as speakers, and we have victims who come to tell their story. So we have guests who come, which adds a day. But when we're doing it out of state, it's a 2-day version. Yeah, and we do probably about I'd say 20 of those a year. We do about 20 trainings of group leaders in 20 different states a year, basically at this point. So we're always happy to talk with you about it. Really like to customize it for folks too. So, right. Any other questions or comments?
Someone uses your model right now. Tina uses your model and loves it. And
Oh, Tina. Oh, good. Thank you, Tina. Yeah. Oh, so that's why you asked that question about like, what if somebody's not in a relationship, right? Oh, yeah, I see now. So you've been frustrated by that, Tina, huh?
I took a training about 20 years ago in Massachusetts.
Oh, you did?
And I think you put it on, if I recall, and it was the Emerge model, and I was using that a lot. And then I got trained several years ago on the Duluth model, but I still like Emerge. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's the advantage of having more individualized problem solving, with the Emerge models. Usually, a lot of times when people start with the Duluth, they'll sort of add those aspects to it where they can do more individualized problem solving, too. So we don't really care. I mean, I'm not like precious about our model, by the way. I mean, I think that people sort of will typically use a variety of different models, and be eclectic. That's fine as far as I'm concerned, right? I mean, I think it is important though to know to figure out what you're trying to teach, though. What are the learning objectives, basically. And that's why I wanted to kind of highlight those at the beginning. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna close out a little bit early. No, it's right on time at this
You're
point.
perfect
So thank you,
time.
Shauna,
Yeah.
for being my host here, and thank you everybody for listening. And happy to hear from anybody if you want to follow up and get some training from Emerge. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.